The story of three affairs which took a sinister turn and turned deadly is told in these following stories. We had a man who caught another man with his wife and beat him to death with great brutality. A treacherous woman who killed her husband's mistress. And last but not least, a lady who will do anything to get her husband's money. Gavin Smith.
Breaking news at this hour, sentencing in a high-profile case of betrayal and murder.
The widow of 20th Century Fox executive Gavin Smith just gave a very angry statement in court.
She was extremely angry. This was her husband who was murdered over an alleged affair that her husband was having with the ex-girlfriend of the man who was found guilty of killing.
This is a chaotic story. It tells the story of a family that appeared to be great from the outside. The Smiths were an attractive family from warm Southern California. They liked being outside and surfing. Gavin had it all, truly. He was married to Lisa Smith, a stunning woman, and the couple produced 3 sporty sons. He had an enormous amount of love for his kids. Gavin gave it a very excellent career and worked for 20th Century Fox for 18 years. However, he had been successful even in college. He received a basketball invitation from UCLA, which according to his brother made him thrilled. Gavin had success and even advanced to the finals of a national championship. He was always working out, attempting to make sure he was the finest athlete.
After he didn't get drafted, when he was with UCLA, he just went off into the mountains for about 5 or 6 days and then came back home.
And in the best condition that he could be. He did this with the intention of playing in the NBA someday. But when it didn't happen, he was completely disappointed. Gavin accepted a new position as a caddy at a golf club after taking some time to grieve the unfulfilled ideal.
We grew up with UCLA basketball. We'd watch it constantly. It was a dream come true for him.
He ultimately discovered that he actually liked golf and changed his career. He would encounter a lot of wealthy and well-known individuals while working, including movie moguls. He made the decision that his new dream would be a career in cinema. He was a newbie, it's true, but that didn't stop him. He was prepared to put in the effort and was eager to learn. He was well-liked and had a wonderful personality.
Caring person, give the shirt off of his back.
Gavin found employment with 20th Century Fox and supported his devoted family with the help of his amazing salary. They appeared to have every amenity a family could desire. However, no family is flawless, and the Smiths had their share of issues. The Smiths were experiencing some financial issues as a result of a real estate market meltdown. That's not all, though. Gavin was in constant discomfort due to a former injury from which he had not fully recovered. Gavin was also dealing with a problem that affects a lot of Americans each year.
He would tell me how much pain he was in, and it's not good for me, Greg. I'm hurting bad.
He had developed a painkiller addiction. He had to keep using more and more drugs over time to have the same results. As is typical of most addictions, he was taking too many, and the situation was out of hand. He ultimately needed to go to rehab, but there were other issues that also needed to be resolved.
He had to do something, and he did it. He took care of it. That's the way he is. He took care of things.
The majority of outsiders were unaware that Gavin and Lisa's marriage had been having issues, and then Chandrika Creech, a brand new young woman, entered his life.
Well, they weren't getting along. We knew that. He called me on my birthday. He had mentioned a couple of things that's not good. He's in a very dark place in regards to his marriage, and the boys are feeling it. He was very depressed.
While undergoing treatment, the two became friends. Over time, they developed a friendship and eventually fell in love. Chandrika also had a husband. John Creech, a drug dealer who had been convicted, was her spouse.
They're separated, but living together, according to those parties. John Creech is actually seeing another woman.
She said that they were solely dating for financial gain. Chandrika had been informed by John that he had moved on from her. He was actually seeing an 18-year-old high school student at the time. Here is a text message they exchanged in which he professes to like her far more than her age, despite the fact that it didn't bother him. His age at the time was 39. In contrast to Chandrika, John was now able to resist drugs. He ultimately moved out of the family home and parted ways with Lisa. This caused the family great suffering. But when he mysteriously vanished in 2012, things took a further tragic turn. Nobody knew where he might be. People have taken notice of this individual.
My partner and I would look at each other and we'd change our minds. And he's a missing person. He just left for a while. Maybe he started using drugs again. Maybe he's in a hotel somewhere.
He is not the kind of person who would vanish without a trace. But given how amazing and loving of a father this man was, wouldn't it be unusual if he disappeared without a trace, without ever speaking to his 3 sons? Then a thorough search would commence. Police thoroughly examined his personal and professional life in an effort to identify probable perpetrators. They weren't even certain at the time that there had been any foul play in this case.
Out there to believe that this was a murder right at the get-go.
After promptly spotting Chandrika's phone number, Lisa checked through phone logs. Police decided to visit her after she informed them that her husband had been having an extramarital affair with this woman. They were not allowed entry, nevertheless by Chandrika. Chandrika admitted the affair, but she insisted she had no idea where Gavin could be.
Let us in the house. We sat down on her porch and we talked to her for a good hour or so. And she admitted to the affair.
The case became significantly more fascinating as soon as authorities learned further details, which they would soon discover. In addition to learning that Chandrika's husband John Creech was a dealer, they also learned that he was aware of the affair and was not really pleased about it. Lisa informed the authorities that she was afraid after learning about the threats John had been making.
He gets very upset and begins sending threatening emails to Gavin Smith saying, I know what you're doing.
She and 2 of her boys actually drove over to John's house to talk to him, and Chandrika wanted to make amends since she was so terrified. Basically, Lisa believed that the threats would quit and the issue would be resolved if she could stop the infidelity on both ends.
It's going to be like a family-to-family situation, and that if she was able to get, quote-unquote, the families together, then Gavin would back off and Chandrika would back off, and there would be no need for John Creech to be angry.
2 of her boys went to the door to try to reason with John while she remained in the car waiting. It's difficult to think of the terror they must have experienced while addressing him in this way. When he was barely 14 years old, Gavin's youngest son told John that he was far too young to lose his father.
Boys basically said, listen, we know that our father is having an affair with your wife and that we're very sorry about it.
Greg, the brother of Gavin, was understandably upset to learn that Lisa had taken the boys to John's home. But surprisingly, this risky tactic initially seemed to work. John expressed his admiration for the boys' visit and informed them that their father's life had been saved as a result.
Why would you send your own children who were underage to confront somebody who think you might murder your husband? I don't get that.
To the sons who left the scene believing that all of the cheating would stop and that their father would be okay, this was probably quite a relief. But as soon as the police learned that there had been ongoing threats against Gavin, they started to worry that this might not just be a case of missing person, but rather a murder. They believed that John might be responsible and that Chandrika might know more than she was disclosing. They ended up having an informant meet up with Chandrika and talking to her in order to gather additional information from her. She tells the whole truth about what actually transpired the night of Gavin's death.
get John Creech and his wife, Chandrika Creech, and we had to basically clear them from any type of allegation.
She was much more knowledgeable than what she admitted to the cops. She and Gavin had agreed to meet at a specific place so they could talk. John, however, becomes suspicious when he learns that she's going and decides to find out what she's up to. He could trace Chandrika to her cell phone because they had an AT&T family plan. He arrived right where Chandrika and Gavin were thanks to it. John loses it completely when he witnesses Gavin and Chandrika kissing. When Chandrika jumps out of the car, John starts yelling at Gavin and repeatedly punching him in the head. Gavin suffers serious wounds. Listen to this terrible description to understand how severely his face had been injured. The assault that would ultimately result in his death was very vicious and violent.
Face is equivalent to falling off a two-story building and landing face.
Chandrika claimed that after beating Gavin to a bloody pulp, John turned to her and warned her that she would be next. She ran away from the incident out of fear. A short while later, John showed up. Chandrika goes back to the crime scene as he requested.
Tells her that if she doesn't drive him back to the location, he's going to tell the police that she was involved in Gavin Smith's murder.
Gavin's pulse cannot be found when John checks it. In order to find someone who can dispose of the body, John drives the Mercedes back to his residence and begins calling people he knows. Chandrika also claimed to the informant that her and John's clothing was stained with Gavin's blood, so she burned it to get rid of the evidence. In the meantime, John calls a buddy of his named George because he's worried about how he would get rid of the body. The men search the hills by car for a suitable location to bury the dead, but they are unable to agree on one. When John contacts another buddy called Stan, Stan agrees to allow John to store the car containing Gavin's body in his garage. However, he is not the final additional participant in this situation. John was successful in convincing a woman by the name of Rena to allow John to rent a van and a sizable storage locker under her name. John then takes the car and travels to a remote location to personally bury it there.
Think of a self-preservation. They just felt that at that point, if they came forward, they were going to be charged with something. And so they wanted to keep their mouth shut.
The bleeding Mercedes is then brought to the storage unit and placed inside. It's absurd to imagine that so many people are involved at this point without any of them telling on one another. Police believe Chandrika saw the killing but was unaware of John's whereabouts when Gavin was killed. However, he miscalculated the cops. They were a good notion of what had happened at this point, but they were unable to put the matter to rest or make the results of their inquiry public at this time. If they did, everything might be at risk. The Mercedes and the body weren't yet available. Therefore, this was the reason. Gavin's frightened family continues to think that he might be a missing person in the meantime.
We're guarded on releasing information because if we give out too much information, we don't know if somebody's telling us what they heard on the news, or what they witnessed, or what they know first.
At this point, they are choosing to believe the best rather than anticipating the worst. They were in excruciating pain, but the police finally get a break in the investigation when they receive a tip about the Mercedes that was hidden in the storage container.
Some DNA from John Creech on the key fob and also on the front license plate screw. The Smith family was able to declare Gavin Smith.
They were able to locate it, and when they did, they discovered that it was bloody. Tara, Gavin's sister, was utterly devastated. According to her family, she sobbed uncontrollably for several hours. Of course, you can't help but think about Gavin's 3 sons. Not to add, there was still no body, so there was no true sense of closure. The body wasn't actually found until a year later when a hiker named Rocky and his dog Buddy finally did. Gavin Smith sadly rests in this small grave.
We looked down and we seen what appeared to be a skull. It didn't have no lower jaw, no eye socket or nothing. It just had like the top.
Due to the length of time that had passed and the degeneration that had occurred, the remains were only skeletal. Their main suspect, John, is currently serving time in prison for drug trafficking. Trial was held in this case.
Why over a virus? A man who was beaten to death by bear.
There was a ton of evidence in the prosecution's favor against John. There was a ton of proof. Jealousy led to the gruesome murder of a father of 3 children. But what about everyone who had assisted John in covering up this crime? When the police offered them immunity in exchange for their testimony against John, they all accepted. John claimed that Gavin attacked him and that it was self-defense in an effort to persuade the jurors that he was innocent.
I won't reach and just pin my head up against the ceiling. And at that point is when I pressed off. I was just like, I just went into, fight or flight mode.
John also said that Gavin went for him that night with a hammer while carrying one. What actually occurred that evening? The jury had to decide who was actually at fault, and they arrived at a conclusion quickly. The results shocked the family. The jury concluded that John did not intend to kill Gavin, and that it was just a crime of passion in light of all the available evidence. The defense believed that the jury would find Gavin less appealing because he was having an affair, and that they may understand John's reaction when he witnessed another guy kissing his wife. Whatever happened, it wasn't the desired result. Not to mention the fact that those responsible for the murder's cover-up were given a free pass. John was subsequently given an 11-year prison term. Lisa describes in court John's heinous crimes. Although he didn't want to be recorded, Gavin and Lisa's oldest son also unleashed on John in court.
I think they should get prison sentences. They should, and here they're walking, they're skating, and it's just wrong.
This wild story, which ended so depressingly, exemplifies the damage that jealousy is capable of causing. If you thought this story was crazy, wait till you hear this next one. Mark Gerardo. The rich suburbs are where the story takes place. It's a neighborhood that welcomes families and is generally crime-free.
It was a listening device.
And it was sewn into the lining of your jacket.
Correct.
It sounds like a spy thriller.
She had taken my phone and had it cloned.
But it's a real-life love story turned tragic.
Until at least a particular day in April 2018, when a report of gunfire is made to the police. When they get to the residence where this happened, they immediately realize they're dealing with a homicide. When Mark Gerardo arrived on the scene, he was visibly upset and said he thought his wife could be inside. Jenny R., the wife of Mark, she was working at Taco Bell when they first met when they were young. Even though he was head over heels in love with her, he didn't approach her about going out until 4 years later.
To me, and I was so upset with them for about checking me that I was yelling at them.
Jenny R. was a fierce girl who was often spotted wearing a leather jacket. The two eventually got married since they were so deeply in love. Although Mark and Jenny R. were happy, their marriage had its shares of ups and downs. Despite their 18-year marriage, they were still having some issues. After Jenny R. lost her job, they thought a change was necessary. So they made the decision to move somewhere else.
Do whatever she wanted to say all the time, and she didn't care what anybody else thought of her.
Mark contacted the person in charge of hiring there and learning about a post for a creative director that was open at the University of Delaware. Meredith Chapman was that individual. Meredith immediately assisted him in scheduling an interview.
She was just a stunning bride.
I'm the bride, I'm Sheree.
We were happy, and I couldn't imagine not being with her the rest of my life.
Mark was 15 years older than she was. However, he was immensely impressed with Meredith's intelligence and accomplishments. When he met and spoke with her, he ultimately received the job after all. He was content, but it's unlikely he realized how this job would change his personal life for the rest of his life forever. This video of him and Jenner enjoying the solar eclipse was shot only 60 days before things drastically changed.
I was actually very concerned. I was concerned about me reporting to someone who was so much younger, had so much less experience.
Mark would be amazed by Meredith's abilities in almost all circumstances. She ran for the Senate despite being only 32 years old at the time and being very accomplished. Meredith was not just stunning, but also a very accomplished person. She and Mark connected right away and discovered they had a lot in common. She eventually proposed a date for drinks. They definitely clicked when he took her out. Mark suddenly found himself telling her everything. Mark also disclosed the issues he and Jenner were facing in their marriage. He was growing closer to Meredith, and they even kissed. Only 4 weeks had passed since their initial encounter. He felt guilty at this point and told Meredith they couldn't continue because he simply couldn't do it to his wife.
Today, I'm announcing my candidacy for the Delaware State Senate for District.
He made the choice to apply for a job in Colorado in order to avoid being seduced by Meredith any further. But he simply couldn't resist her. When he got back home, they started dating in secret.
Easy to talk to her. I told her about having just lost my parents, both of my parents, because it just happened. I had just lost my brother as well.
There were other cheaters beside Mark. Meredith, who was also married, insisted she wasn't content. They had been married for 9 years, but the last 3 had not been good. Mark asserted that he was unfamiliar with these claims. He and Meredith were falling for each other quickly. Then again, what about Jenner? Mark cherished his wife despite it. He had a different kind of affection for Meredith.
I felt enthralled. It was such a connection. To shut it down just didn't.
While things were fresh and thrilling with Meredith, they had become regular with Jenner. In the meantime, Jenner had begun to grow skeptical of Mark because of how much he had raved about Meredith. Mark refused to acknowledge there was a problem when she challenged him. He was unaware, though, that Jenner had cloned his phone and was secretly recording his conversations with Meredith. Jenner confronts Mark after gathering further proof and letting him know the truth. The two decided to attend marriage counseling, but one day as Mark was taking off his jacket, he found a listening device stitched into the lining of his jacket. His wife had been watching and listening to everything he did, and he was very shocked. But Mark soon had discovered that Junior had not only located Meredith's husband and informed him about the affair, but had also informed the university about it as well. Nothing seems to be fixable. Jenner and Mark are moving toward divorce. Meredith obtains a new position at Villanova University and is still dating Mark. Jenner, meanwhile, is grieving terribly and is by herself. Jenner was devastated to learn that her husband no longer thought her attractive. She was enraged and held a lot of grudges towards Meredith. She and Mark were having a peaceful life apart, and she was all by herself.
Finally just told her I'm in love with Meredith. I can't deny it anymore.
What would occur next is something Mark could never have predicted. Jenner was supposed to meet him for drinks one night, but she never arrived. She afterwards sent him some odd texts, including one that said, "You ruined my life," and another one that said, "Goodbye, Mark." Then, with a horrible feeling in his gut, he messaged Meredith. He eventually drove over to her place after she hung up when he called. When he entered, he saw a terrible scene. Jenner was lying close to Meredith when she was found on the ground.
Obvious to me that this was going in a certain direction.
You wanted to end your marriage.
I wanted to end the marriage.
Both were non-responsive. As soon as Mark left the house, he dialed the police. He gradually realized that not only was his longtime wife gone, but also his new lover. Meredith had been murdered by Jenner before she shot herself. Mark was now all by himself.
It made an imprint on my heart, and it really challenged me in the sense of not judging.
Mark is so upset at the hospital, though, that they bring in a priest to talk to him. He talked about what had happened as a result of some of his own activities, as the priest sat with him for hours. Mark made judgments that he shouldn't have taken, and those choices ultimately had a role in the deaths of 2 women. Mark is focusing on forgiving himself for his previous actions while he recovers from this.
One of the questions the police said, we have to ask this question. Did you shoot these 2 women? And I literally said, they were shot. That was the moment at which it all just kind of caved in. My world was gone.
This terrible story exemplifies the suffering that adultery may bring. Sheree Miller.
As she played these games, my son died.
Says I was so blind and so stupid and so much in love.
Life wasn't simple for Sheree Miller. She says she was just 3 or 4 years old when she received her first SA.
As far as where Sheree was living, probably more rural, where there's several junkyards where people go and take cars or sell parts and do that kind of thing.
There were frequently new guys in her mother's life because she had gone through multiple divorces. She married when she was just 17 years old, since she was eager to move out. She then married again when she was in her 20s and gave birth to multiple children. Later, she accepted a position at Bruce Miller's junkyard. Bruce loved cars a lot. He was a devoted NASCAR fan who worked extremely hard. Dale Earnhardt was his favorite driver.
Of a jar with all those parts and all that stuff for him to play with was just his idea of heaven.
Sheree was much younger than Bruce, but the two still ended up dating. She moved into his house with her children. People in the village were shocked by the 20-year age gap. But Bruce treated Sheree and her children with great kindness. Bruce and Sheree married after only a brief period of dating. Others may have thought their pairing was strange, but the couple appeared happy. The other ex-husbands of Sheree were nothing like Bruce. He provided her with a sense of security that she utilized to raise her kids.
She started spending a lot of Bruce's money, including plenty on clothes and toys for her children.
You get everything you want? Yeah. But then you're spoiled rotten brat.
But in the end, it wouldn't be sufficient for her. In a short period of time, Sheree piled up a sizable debt on Bruce's credit card. That's not all, though. Additionally, she was playing with AOL chat rooms, which were brand new at the time. She also started conversing with other men behind Bruce's back. She spent the entire day chatting only with males online. She eventually ran into Jerry Cassaday, and the two hit it off. Things between them quickly became heated and intense. In his life, Jerry was going through a difficult moment. He had financial issues and was going through a divorce. Things appear to change for him when Sheree enters his life. She claims to be wealthy and to be the owner of a junkyard. He gets the impression from her that she will share her wealth with him. Sheree found Jerry to be fascinating and interesting, so she went to see him and spent the night with him behind Bruce's back. Sheree went back to her house to be with Bruce and her kids while still having a side conversation with Jerry. Bruce had no way of knowing that his wife and her lover were planning a dreadful scheme. Sheree claims that she was waiting for Bruce to get home one day in November 1999.
Calling Bruce's mom to see if she had heard from Chuck. She told me that an ambulance had been called and Bruce was hurt. I called the yard several times, over and over again, just wanting Chuck to pick up the phone
so that he could cook supper and keep the kids while she attended a Mary Kay meeting. She eventually called his brother Chuck when the hours passed and he still hadn't arrived. Bruce worked in a junkyard, so Chuck drove there to see if he could locate him.
My mom and her husband told them Bruce had been hurt and that they needed to come to my house. So they came over to the house, and I continued to call Ruth, and I continued to call the yard. And I just got more hysterical when I was watching the clock, and Bruce should have been home.
Sheree calls Bruce's mother to see if she has any updates as the days go on, and she still hasn't received any. Sheree is becoming increasingly concerned. Sheree claimed that while she knew her husband was harmed but didn't know how, She went into a fit of hysteria. To try to calm Sheree down, the family gathered at her house.
Ultimately, you found out what happened.
Hours later, maybe, a detective came to my house, Detective Petrovka.
He asked you some questions.
He took me in my bedroom alone, and because there were so many people at my house, and he wanted to question me about the events of the day.
The horrible truth would soon come to light, and it wouldn't take long. If Bruce had any health issues, Sheree was questioned by the police. She claims that given that Bruce was experiencing chest problems at the time and was frequently absent from work, owing to back trouble, this makes her think that he may have had a health episode. At that point, Sheree found out that Chuck had discovered Bruce lying in a pool of his own blood when he went to the junkyard to search for him.
I was so upset at that time. It was scarce that I talked to him. I didn't talk to him very much. He was continually calling my house. 3 o'clock in the morning, my mom would answer the phone, and there was a privacy management block on my phone, and they would hang up.
Bruce was taken directly to the hospital after he called for an ambulance. He sadly did not make it. Over the next few days, Sheree continues to portray the part of a mourning widow. She didn't waste any time in delivering financial documents to guarantee that she was named the beneficiary of Bruce's estate after the funeral for Bruce. Sheree claims that she was so upset during this time that she was given prescription medication and spent the majority of her time in bed.
Later, Jerry told me that he had called and that a woman had told him that my husband had died.
And eventually you talked to him and explained to him what happened?
Yes, I did.
She continued to communicate with Jerry throughout. Sheree acknowledged that she continued to speak with Jerry after Bruce passed away, but she claimed that they didn't speak very frequently. She even claimed that Jerry was continuously attempting to get in touch with her against her will and would sometimes call in the middle of the night. Sheree would eventually acknowledge that she had indeed seen Jerry the following month. Sheree claimed that Jerry had proposed to her while intoxicated.
A taxi pulled in my driveway. In fact, I was sitting in my chair with my laptop online, and a taxi pulled up my driveway. It was about midnight. And he knocked on the door, and I opened the door, and there's Jerry.
This ultimately heated up and culminated into a larger altercation. Jerry needed money, she claimed, and she told him she couldn't offer him any. However, she did deliver him to the airport. Sheree is beginning to get some money from Bruce's estate in the meantime. She spends it on a car for herself. Sheree's new existence, however, wouldn't last for long because she was taken into custody in February 2000, only a few months after Bruce passed away. In relation to Bruce's passing, she was accused of plotting his murder. It would be discovered that she tricked Jerry into killing Bruce by telling him he was mistreating her. Later, she would own up to her actions. She was convicted and given a life term in jail, where she is still today. What about Jerry, you ask? He committed suicide with the same gun he had used to murder Bruce. He probably didn't know the whole story concerning Sheree and her marriage. There you have it, 3 stories of relationships gone horribly wrong. These incidents exemplify the profound impact that jealousy and infidelity can have on individuals. Thanks for watching, and good night.